The Echo Chamber, brought to you by the Holmes Report and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers. Sponsored by the Bullet Group, putting you in tomorrow's conversations today.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Echo Chamber podcast. This is Arun Sudhaman, and I'm joined here today in Hong Kong by Senior Vice President of RFI Asia, David Koh. Hello, David. How are you?
Hello. Good.
It's good to be here in your office in Wong Chuk Hang, part of Hong Kong I haven't been to in a long time, but where I grew up, weirdly enough. And very surprising to see that there's a Starbucks and a Pizza Express here.
I'm sure it brings back a lot of memories.
Well, no, because none of this stuff was here when I grew up here.
When we first moved here, there were no Starbucks and Pizza Expresses either. So,
it's crazy.
It was before the subway even started. So,
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
MTR. Anyway, we're going to talk about fake news, I guess, which is a popular topic. But specifically, I think, around some of the more recent trends in terms of what we're seeing. In terms of deepfake content, for example, and what it means for social media networks, and perhaps what it means for marketers as well. Now, you were just in a discussion on this, right? In Singapore, is that correct?
It was actually in Hong Kong.
Oh, it was in Hong Kong.
CSR Summit.
Right, okay. And that was with some of the social media platforms.
Absolutely. So I moderated a panel where we had guests from both Facebook and Google.
Right.
So from Facebook, we had Claire Deavy, who heads up public policy for Asia. And her counterpart at Google was Jake Lucci. So they were both on the panel, and we had a very far-reaching discussion about the balance of personal responsibility versus the platform's responsibility when it comes to policing fake news, fraudulent content, and so on.
Yeah.
So it was very interesting. And we had obviously a full house because this is a very hot topic right now.
Yeah. And
lots of questions from the audience. We also had an academic on the panel, so it was a lecturer from Hong Kong University. So it was a really good mix of just representatives from different sectors. I think obviously Facebook or Google, the platforms will say that it's not just their responsibility, the public or the consumer of information. We have a role to play as well. And one of the things that came out of that was just the fact that not a lot of people know that you can easily flag any piece of content on Facebook that you think is suspicious for Facebook to actually go in and check, right? And a lot of people don't know that you can report anything. So in a sense, people also have to just take it on and not just say, Facebook or whatever social media platform, you do the hard work for me, you do the filtering, you only show me what is correct, because that is a very, very gray area. It's a vast gray area of what exactly is content that is appropriate and content that's not.
But then don't you end up in a situation where perhaps you have people reporting information simply because they don't like it, or it doesn't agree with their views, even if it is accurate, for example? I mean, can you necessarily trust people to verify whether something is real or fake?
Yeah, that's why I think it's a two-step process. So it's people reporting or flagging content to be reviewed, but obviously they're not going to be the arbiter of what finally is determined to be whether it's fake or actually authentic content, right? So, but at least by flagging something, you're using the collective power of the crowd to at least give Facebook statistical data on which to base, whether something is serious enough to be looked at with the resources. I think the world has kind of changed. So if I go back 5 years to 10 years ago, I think fake news or clickbait, which was more something that people were concerned about at that time, was an offshoot of just the nature of the platform itself, because we're all competing for eyeballs. So a lot of media publishers, they're looking for ways to basically increase their ways to make revenue from eyeballs, right? So it's all about getting more attention, more sensational headlines, we didn't really cross over into creating fake news or fake content with the intent of actually creating or achieving a certain end, right? Whereas I think in recent years, with a lot of that has happened in the West, whether it's elections or referendums, there's an active effort on the part of bad actors to actively create fake news to influence results. And I think that's where the vigilance comes in, because when clickbait is your problem, it's not that serious. I mean, you can pretty much fight clickbait very easily. And I think Facebook did their part to change their algorithms a few years ago to actually filter out or deprioritize clickbait content, right? But when you're talking about organized groups that actually, create content to mobilize and deceive and, cause people to believe really outlandish things and actually cause harm, as in physical harm, I think that becomes a whole new different ballgame. And you actually need to almost overcompensate in how you fight that. I mean, if you remember the election, remember that case where there was a pizza restaurant and there was this rumor that Hillary was running
pedophile ring.
The pedophile ring. I mean, a sensible person would not believe that, right? And you would think that would not go very far. And I think because most people didn't consider that serious news at all, I don't think the mainstream news media even picked up on that. And so there was no active reason to fight it until something happened, right? And the shooting happened. And I think it was a wake-up call for a lot of people where they realized, oh, there are actually people out there that are affected by this. And it's now getting to the point where you have to actively or take active measures to counter this. And I think that's where I personally believe that the platforms have a responsibility to devote resources to proactively come out and say, this piece of news is fake, or be aware of this publisher, and we don't carry content from this particular publisher, for example. So I was talking to my colleague today from China, and we manage a lot of WeChat accounts for our clients. WeChat actually has an active WeChat account that actively debunks fake news.
Right.
So, they maintain this, and they have staff behind it, and they actually go out and actively research content on their platform. And they'll say, this rumor that's going around about, so-and-so having a scandal with whomever is not true and has been actively debunked. And it's kind of like the Snopes, right? So I think we need more like that from the likes of Facebook and Twitter and other social media platforms, because I think extraordinary actions demand extraordinary measures.
Do you think the social networks are doing enough, or do you worry perhaps that they're trying to place too much responsibility on the user?
I think they need to do more. I wouldn't say that they're expecting the users to do everything or be accountable for their own content that they consume, but I would love to see Facebook do what WeChat is doing, do what Tencent is doing, which is to have an active role in debunking fake news, fraudulent news, and so on. Because frankly, the purveyors of fake news, the creators of deepfakes and so on, they're getting very good. And when it's not just about clickbait headlines, but actually trying to achieve, say, political ends. That means they have very real world benefits from being successful, right? So they have it's a war basically. I think, and we need soldiers on our side when they've got soldiers already on their side, or spies, or whatever you choose to call them.
Yeah. So you mentioned deepfake content. I wonder if you could perhaps talk us through that a little bit, because it seems like deepfake content is becoming quite sophisticated in its ability to deceive people.
Especially videos now. So I don't know if you've seen the Jordan Peele deepfake video of Obama.
Yeah, that one I've seen.
Yeah. I think that's a great example of something that's so. So I show that to a lot of clients, and I think for a lot of them it's a wake-up call. I mean, it always gets a laugh at the end when it's revealed that it's actually not Obama himself, but behind the humor is a very sobering message, which is you can no longer believe what you see. You know, it used to be don't believe everything you read, or don't believe everything you hear. And now with the advent of AI, or more accurately machine learning, it's getting to the point where you cannot even believe what you see. And of course with still photography, that's been the case for many years, right? Because photographs are very easily doctored. But we're now entering the age where videos are very easily doctored. So there's really no final frontier. I think we've reached it, unless, you know, when we get to a situation where VR becomes very common and you have fake VR content, then maybe that's the final frontier. But we're entering an age where it's very dangerous. And especially when we're living in a digital age, right? Everyone practically lives on the internet now. And we have this quick twitch response to what we see on the internet. So you don't always have the luxury of time to debunk something you see. And if deepfake content is produced in such a way that causes a visceral reaction, whether it's outrage, anger, disgust, and that can easily lead to a snowball effect of actions and consequences. And oftentimes you're not going to have time to correct it. And frankly, also in this age where there's so much going on and there's so much information, by the time you realize there's a problem, people have already moved on, right? And so the impact can be lasting.
What kind of risks does it pose for your clients? You said you show them the deep fake videos. I don't know if any of them have actually faced any real world problems yet, but if not, what worries them, I guess, and what worries you in terms of the threats to your clients?
I think it's being in the area that I am. I think it is reputational risk, reputational impact. We work with a lot of companies that are in the public interest. You know, we work with mass transit companies. We work with F&B conglomerates. You know, we work with a company that owns a majority of many restaurants here in Hong Kong, for example. So one simple deepfake video about food contamination, food safety, employee, behavior could have a very lasting impact on the reputation of the company. So they are very worried about people with malicious intent creating content designed to hurt them. And the way that the human brain works, of course, even if you later debunk the fake information, the impression is there, right? So the damage may already be done. So I think a lot of clients are wondering, how do we actively police against it? How do we detect this sort of surge of negative sentiment as early as we can? And I think that's something that many marketers are working on.
Yeah, I mean, there's no tech solution for it, is there?
There can be.
Right.
There can be. So we work in a space that relies a lot on social listening and sentiment detection. So we're in this process of getting sentiment detection as accurate as possible and as early as possible. So, imagine if we're constantly monitoring the internet for all the conversations about a particular brand, and we know right down to the minute what the sentiment level is about that brand. So if you see a spike in negative sentiment, for example, you can detect that right down to perhaps minutes or at the very most hours. So you can always see when there's an uptick in negative sentiment, that something's going on, and we can employ software to monitor these multiple spikes every day and actively go out and debunk if it is negative spikes in sentiment due to fake news or something fraudulent. We can then go out and actively debunk it with accurate information or real news. And that's something that we're constantly working towards.
Yeah. Okay. In terms of the Chinese social media platforms, you mentioned WeChat, Tencent previously. I mean, do they have the same fake news problems that the likes of Facebook and Twitter do?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. China, it's a very interesting dichotomy in China where obviously you have a lot of censorship, especially of topics that the government deems unfriendly or unacceptable. But outside of that, it's pretty freewheeling. So you're in a country where you've got 1 billion monthly active users on WeChat, for example. That's a lot of that's a very fertile field for a lot of misinformation to spread, and it has. And that's actually the impetus for WeChat to take active measures to come out and say, we have this WeChat account, come subscribe to this, and we will do our best to inform you of what's fake out there. And I was watching this video produced by the New York Times, and they were talking about fake news and deep fakes. And in certain countries that are very frequent targets of misinformation campaigns, like the Ukraine, they even have a TV show, a nightly TV show that debunks fake news that you see on internet. So it's gone to the point where you have a prime time show that tries to fight this. So you can see that it's a very real war now. And I'm actually very pleased that in a country like China, WeChat's taking active steps to counter this.
Sure.
But of course, the internet users themselves, the WeChat users, they also need to be very vigilant as well.
Do you see a risk of companies themselves turning into bad actors here and maybe using the latitude that is on offer to perhaps try to disseminate information about themselves which isn't necessarily genuine?
I would never say that no company would do that. We always take pains to advise our clients never to do that, because authenticity is a very expensive currency that you can lose very quickly.
Yeah.
And you know this. It takes years to build trust. It takes years to prove that you're authentic as a brand, and it can literally be destroyed with one tweet, right? So the downside is too much for brands to take the risk. And frankly, if a client insisted on doing that, we would probably just not work with them. Now, where it becomes a little bit gray is, remember people used to say spinning, putting a different spin on things. That's where it can become, because my truth might not be the same as your truth. So if a company believes, or a brand believes, that their perception of the truth is the truth, and they go out and they actively put that out into the world, are they being disingenuous? I don't know. That's a tough one.
Yeah.
But I always counsel clients, if in doubt, always strive for being authentic. Always strive for being transparent as much as you can.
Yeah.
Because it's really not worth it to squander that currency.
What about the risks? I mean, I guess in China specifically, because China's not the only country in the world where this happens, but in this region, I think it's probably where it's most popular, where you see this phenomenon, sometimes termed black PR. Sometimes you have companies actually attacking or going after other companies within their own industry or sector. And I think we have seen that in certain sectors. And it would seem to me that the possibilities offered by deep fake content and fake news are quite attractive, perhaps, to less scrupulous operators.
That's true.
I mean, how can you defend against that?
That's a hard one. I can still remember when Weibo and WeChat first started becoming popular. There rose up this cottage industry of companies that you could just hire. We call them 打手. You've heard this, right?
Yep.
You could hire people to go out there and actively defame your competitors and spread rumors and negative news. And it was always this, the shady underbelly of the China internet.
Sure.
Those companies still exist. Those agencies still exist.
Yeah.
If anything, there's probably more of them now. I don't know that that's ever going to disappear, because whenever there's profit to be made, there will be people willing to do the criminal thing, right? Or perhaps just unethical.
Yeah.
So it's a constant fight. But what was also very interesting at the time was, in addition to the Dasho agencies, you could also hire other agencies that could go out and actively delete.
It's the same agencies, isn't it?
It could be the same agencies. So it's almost farcical. And in a sense, that's why people say, it always comes back to you as an internet user to take a critical thinking stance.
Right.
Right. And don't believe everything you read or see. And that's easy to say, though. I mean, I was talking to my colleague from China the other day, and they say that there's this, the people who are most susceptible to fake news in China are the older generation. These are the retirees, people who sit at home and have a lot of time on their hands, and they go online and they believe what they read, because they grew up in an age when you believe what you read in the newspaper. Or now, it's online publications. And that's the generation most difficult to instill this sense of personal responsibility to vet what they consume. Our generation, we talk about subscribing to multiple news sources, always making sure that you see both sides of the argument. If you're a liberal, subscribe to Fox as well. Just making sure that you have a balanced view of the world. The older generation in China, they may not have that attitude, right? Because they weren't brought up to know that they need to do that. And so my colleague from China would say, oh yeah, there's this big problem now with grandmothers reading a piece of news about a certain food that they shouldn't eat, and they just stop eating. And I think, people stopped eating eggs for a while because there's some toxins in egg, and fake rice. There's fake rice in China, so they don't eat rice from certain sources because it's fake rice. Crabs, right? There's a hairy crab season in China, and there's news about how hairy crab from the source is filled with carcinogenic toxins and so on. So there's all this stuff going on, this kind of swirling around, and I kind of feel for them, because sometimes you almost don't know what to believe anymore. And of course, in the West, you see the result as well of I don't think it's an accident that there's a clear divide in age between people that stand on both sides of an issue. I think Brexit versus Remain is a great example. And then, of course, in the US, you've got other examples as well. So to me, that means that, yes, the older generation, they don't have that attitude of maintaining a balanced stance, taking responsibility for thinking critically. But it's gratifying to see that the younger generation does, because they grew up in this age, and they know that, all right, they have to be vigilant, and in a sense, almost to protect themselves in this, what is effectively an information war.
Yeah.
Right?
But I guess the problem is that it weakens trust in everyone, right? Even if you are 100% honest and reliable and doing everything the way it should be done, the fact that because there's so much fake news out there, that can weaken trust in your own brand through no fault of your own, right? So it almost creates this environment, I feel, where everyone is less trusted, which must be a challenge, I would think, for your clients and indeed for the counsel you provide them.
Yes, it is, and I'm not sure I have an answer for that. Yes, we do see across the board an erosion of trust in brands, in governments, in the establishment, quote unquote, right? I don't know that there's a solution. I think this is a problem that we all struggle with.
Yeah, and what about well, I was going to say the influence of influencers, but what about the impact they have? Because they are considered to be more trusted now because for whatever reason they're seen as being more authentic, even though in many cases they strike me as being less authentic. But brands are putting a lot of trust and a lot of money in them. I mean, how do you see that equation?
I think the jury is still out as to how effective are our influencers. Obviously, we all know that in China, China is a huge market for influencers, or what they call KOLs there.
KOLs, yep.
And also, I think in this area, there are a few companies that are producing solutions that help you choose the right KOLs to use in campaigns.
So benchmarking them.
There are solutions out there, for example, that give you a probability score of how likely a particular KOL is to be embroiled in a scandal over the next 6 months. I'm not exactly sure how they do it. I'd love to see that algorithm.
Yeah.
But I know that that's something that's being actively developed.
Wow.
And if I'm being honest, we're one of them. We're looking into it. There's a bit of R&D going on about that.
Interesting.
We do actually have a product, if I may plug this a little bit, where we will connect a KOL and the purchase intent and the purchasing power of their followers on e-commerce platforms to predict how effective a KOL will be in helping you convert consumers.
Yeah.
And that's a product that we've already launched.
Okay.
And so, because that answers a question that a lot of brands and marketers are asking, which is, if I pay $5 million to a KOL, how does that translate into real-world sales conversions? What is my ROI? And I think so. That's our attempt. That's Rudifin's attempt to answer that question. And I'm sure that there will be other solutions to come to kind of address different, questions about how effective are KOLs. Now, the great thing about KOLs in China, especially at the tier 1 level, is it's very transparent. You know how much, a tier 1 KOL would cost to use in a campaign. So at least in terms of how much you spend on a KOL, that's very transparent. It's in the end result, right? The business result. That's where there's a lot of a lack of clarity or ambiguity. But I think a lot of different companies are working on solutions to solve that.
Okay, and then the last thing I wanted to ask you about, if I may, is a story about China that seems to have captured the attention of the Western media, and particularly the Western marketing media. That social media behavior is starting to be used to determine a person's credit score, or even their kind
social credit.
Yeah, their social credit. I mean, how do you see that as I suppose an indicator of behavior, and indeed something that both governments and companies might look to in the future?
I think it's a double-edged sword. I think it is a system that is ripe for abuse, and in the wrong hands, it could become an instrument for, not just for managing behavior, but perhaps for oppression as well. I think it's early days. It's hard to tell, and I wouldn't want to just jump to conclusions and assign malicious intent to any system to control. I think as humans, our very nature is to rebel against any system of control. I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. I do believe that sometimes we need to have control. We need to have ways of not necessarily managing, but at the very least be able to identify where a problem is and influence behavior to solve that problem. I think fake news is a great example. It is because of this lack of any kind of control that we're in the situation that we are in today, where elections are being influenced and world events are being influenced by fake news on social media. If 5 years ago, 10 years ago, people say maybe we have a problem here, maybe we need to put some control mechanisms in place, the world might be very different today. So I don't instinctively judge. If I look at the social credit system, for example, I don't necessarily think it's completely bad. I think it's how it is being used that is the open question.
But how does it work exactly? Is it just a case of people, of your social media presence being scored according to certain criteria?
That's very murky. So I was just talking to my colleagues from China, and I said, you guys know about this, right? And so, first of all, there's not a lot of very solid, clear news about how the system actually works.
Exactly, yeah.
So my colleagues from Beijing, they say, I mean, if your social credit's low, you may not be able to purchase plane tickets,
right,
or train tickets. So your ability to freely travel within the country is curtailed.
Right.
And that's about all that they know. So my sense is that there's not a lot of public information about the system itself,
right,
which is not a good thing because it means that it's subject to a lot of interpretation by news sources in the West,
sure.
right? Because when there's a vacuum, nature abhors a vacuum. People are going to come in and make assumptions, right?
Sure.
Same thing with Alibaba and Jack Ma. How it was revealed that he's a Communist Party member, and it's in a sense it's laughable because inside China, it is extremely common for someone to be a party member. It's not considered a big deal. Whereas outside of China, people who don't know that will say, well, what if he's caught between a party directive versus shareholders' interests and so on? That's never an issue. So I think just more awareness and more transparency is always better.
Yeah, I think just with the social credit idea, it's if people don't know what's being measured, that's probably not ideal, perhaps. Although maybe, I would really worry if people were rating my own social media presence according to various criteria. I'm not sure.
It sounds very dystopian, isn't it? It is scary. It is scary.
Yeah, but then you also think, credit scores in a way, and the way insurance companies look at your life as a whole is also a little bit dystopian to begin with. So this is kind of, I guess, taking that one step further.
Exactly.
Perhaps.
So there was a piece of news yesterday about how one of the newspapers in Hong Kong, they were able to log into one of the credit rating,
I saw
about
that.
this TransUnion, and found the credit rating of some government officials here. That kind of stuff happens every day.
Well, that's another issue, isn't it? Cybersecurity. I think you have a product for that too.
We do.
Good. I'd be worried if you didn't.
Yeah, exactly. But what's also very interesting is with the recent Cathay Pacific data breach incident, we're getting a lot of clients come to us and say, can you do a detailed analysis of the Cathay case,
right,
and tell us what they did wrong, what they should have done. And so that has actually generated a lot of interest and a lot of conversation.
Yeah.
And not just among our consumer brand clients, but especially among the financial industry.
Sure.
Banks and insurers and so on. So that's something that people take very seriously.
So Cathay's not a client, are they, of
No,
yours? No.
No.
So what did they do wrong? If you don't mind sharing a little bit, maybe not all of it.
Well, you'd have to come to our workshop for me to tell you that. But I think it's still early days. I mean, what we did was, we kind of looked at the chronology of the incident, how it unfolded from March to May to October.
That was one of the big issues, right? They didn't tell anyone for a few months.
So breaking down the steps of what they should have done during March, what they should have done during May, So it's interesting just to, obviously hindsight is 2020. So I don't purport to say that if we were in their shoes way back in March or May, that we wouldn't make the same mistakes. But for the benefit of our clients, we are taking hindsight lens to this and saying, this is where they made this choice versus this other choice and so on. For an outsider, it's always the solution is always very clear. But I'm sure that internally it's a very complex issue. It's also a company that perhaps has suffered a little bit in terms of their reputation
already
in recent years. So I think they were perhaps being extra cautious. So many different considerations. But I'm sure they'll recover in time. But it's been very damaging for them.
Sure. Well, David, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure, and we'll hopefully have you back on in the not too distant future.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
Cool. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back with the Echo Chamber next week.
You've been listening to the Echo Chamber. Brought to you by the Holmes Report and produced by Marketeers. Sponsored by the Bullet Group, putting you in tomorrow's conversations today.